Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. So, several days ago, in the channel update, I talked about, what kind of content people might be interested in. And somebody told me that they really liked lawyer stories. And it occurred to me that I have never explained how it is that I got to this crazy place that I'm at in my life. And so I thought I would do that for you today because I'm going to release this on Saturday, and I will be up at the Hamfest in Huntsville. I won't be making content that day, and I thought this would be a good one to release on that day. So I hope you will find this interesting, and if not, certainly entertaining. So one of the things that frequently comes up when I talk with people is, how did you get to become a lawyer? First you were in the Army, then you became a combat medic, you became a respiratory therapist. How did you do those things and then come to this thing? And the answer is, I really had never wanted to be anything else. It just happened that my life didn't progress in an orderly manner. So I have to go back to Mrs. Waite. God bless her. She has long since gone to her reward, but she was an eighth grade English teacher for us. And this was at Smith Cotton High School in Sedalia, Missouri. Often described by folks as, if there's a bright spot in the universe, it's the point furthest from it. But I was in eighth grade for at least part of the year there that year, and I had Mrs. Waite. And one of the assigned readings was this novel, not really novel, short story by Stephen Vincent Benet called The Devil and Daniel Webster. If you have not read this story, pause the video right here and go read the thing on Wikipedia. If you can find the actual story, that's even better. But go find the entry on Wikipedia and read about the devil and Daniel Webster, because it's a fascinating story. And I won't do it justice in this summary here. So what happened in The Devil and Daniel Webster is a farmer who'd had a lot of trouble decided that he would sell his soul to somebody called Mr. Scratch, which is how the devil was known in New Hampshire in the 1800s. And as a result, when the day came, the devil came to collect the soul, and the farmer wasn't quite willing to give it up. And so he hired Daniel Webster to represent him in what amounted to a contract dispute. And so he told the devil that, any American was entitled to a jury trial, and he wanted a trial by jury. And he told the devil that the devil could pick the judge and the jury. So the devil did. And he picked some infamous characters from American history to serve on the jury. And they are described as coming into the jury box with the hellfires still on them, which must have made a jury trial rather uncomfortable, I would think. But for those of you who do jury service and have done jury service, I'm sure it wasn't comfortable to begin with. And imagine what it would have been like if you'd been sitting in fire. That would have been a bad thing. I digress, but sometimes I just think funny things. Anyway, the evidence is very clearly in favor of the devil. He's got the guy's signature on a contract, and the contract is binding. But Daniel Webster starts off with what he was best known for, which was great oratory. And among the things that he talks about is the feel of a fine spring morning, and he waxes eloquent about, this thing that was created in the United States, and the greatness of a country that was built on democracy. If you want to feel good about your country, you should absolutely read the whole story. It is phenomenal. And in the course of going through his oratory in defense of the farmer, a guy by the name of Jabez Stone, he gets a verdict in favor of the defendant, which even the foreman of the jury admits might not be in accord with the evidence, but you know, they were the jury and they could do what they wanted. And the devil didn't really want to give up, but basically he admitted that Daniel Webster had bested him. And then he proceeded to tell Daniel Webster that there would be a revolt in the country, that there would be a civil war, and all the stuff that went on with that. And it's a fascinating look at a character from American history, Daniel Webster. Even though it's fictional, it's a fascinating look at it. And the thing that I found so powerful about it was that you could just use words and change lives. Now, I know it was fiction, right? I understand that it was a completely made up story, although in a case, Gerald Mayo ex rel, or United States ex rel Mayo versus Satan and his minions, a case out of that area of the country several years ago that was decided in federal court, actually makes a citation to the devil and Daniel Webster, albeit an oblique one. The thought of it just being able to go up and argue, I wanted to be that guy. I wanted to be the guy who could get up and with powerful oratory tell people what they needed to hear to get justice for somebody who desperately needed it. Yeah, the arrogance of youth. I have had the opportunity to argue cases in front of a jury. I've had the opportunity to argue cases in front of the Supreme Court of Missouri and the other appellate courts in Missouri. And that's a great privilege and one that I am so thankful I was accorded. But I will never be a Daniel Webster. But it is not always the completion of a goal that matters nearly so much as the attempt at the goal. And I tried very hard when I did talk to juries to be that guy. What can I say? I'm batting 500, and it's not a bad situation to be in. Even in situations where I didn't address the jury, the work that I did before we got there and the work that I did after they got there was fundamental in getting the result that we got. So not everybody can be a Daniel Webster in front of a jury. Sometimes we get to be a Daniel Webster with the written word. And over the course of my career, that's what I found. That I could be Daniel Webster in print. That I could write and argue very well in written format, and that my briefs and the work that I did made a huge difference. So the devil and Daniel Webster is really what put me on that path. It was, strike that. It was the television show Emergency. Many of you may remember it. It had Randolph Mantooth and another guy whose name I can't recall, but it was about two paramedics in Los Angeles who went out and saved lives. And I was greatly impressed by that. And as I was a teenager at the time and subject to the thrills of adrenaline, that was what I wanted to be. So that's when I got into the Army. That's when I went through the training and became a paramedic. And I loved that work. And then I later became a respiratory therapist. And I discovered as I progressed through the ranks and became a department administrator that all that glitters is not gold, and all that purports to be a concern about your health care is not necessarily a concern about your health care. What I found was that hospital administrations cared a lot less about getting you well than they did about getting into your wallet. And that was pretty shocking to me because in my world, in the world that I imagined existed at the time, doctors were always these saintly creatures, very much like my dad, who worked for 42 years as a small town physician, not so much in search of wealth and fortune as in being this outlet for the community, this place to come when they were not well so that they could get well and go home. And hospitals have to keep the doors open. Okay, I recognize that. But a lot of what they did was not aimed at that. And perhaps the fundamental thing that pushed me toward a career in the law, at the age of 35, by the way, was an incident I had when I produced this program in the hospital where respiratory therapists would go and evaluate patients. And if the doctor had ordered more therapy than they needed, particularly for Medicare patients, because Medicare patients, the hospital was reimbursed based on a set formula, and the more days they stayed in the hospital, the less the hospital was reimbursed overall. So there was a better deal for the hospital if the hospital could treat them and street them. And the way you treat them and street them, if you're a respiratory therapist, is you make sure they don't develop any kind of pulmonary compromise while they're in the hospital. And you work the most effective therapy you can if there is some kind of compromise. And a lot of doctors were what we used to refer to as herb and root specialists. In other words, they had been practicing medicine for so long, they were practicing medicine in 1980 as if it was the 1950s, and that is not a good thing. And so these 00 doctors, right, licensed to kill, these 00 doctors were a problem, and they indicated that they would be willing, in many cases, to perhaps be guided by respiratory therapists. Now, we had a lot of doctors that we called and said, look, we think you should change this patient from an IPPB treatment, which was positive pressure, over to just a nebulizer, and we'd do a lot better with that. And a lot of times they'd listen, a lot of times they'd do it. Every now and then you'd get a recalcitrant one who'd say, no, I know what I ordered, and I ordered what I ordered. Well, okay. What happened was we reduced a lot of unnecessary therapy, and one day I got called into the administrator's office. And they said, this is working really well for Medicare patients, but all of these privately paid patients, we get paid for the respiratory therapy that you do for them, so it would be great if you just used your program on the Medicare patients. And I said, look, that's not the purpose of the program. The purpose of the program is not to deliver unnecessary care. And if somebody doesn't need an aspirin, you don't give them an aspirin, right? If somebody doesn't need Demerol, you don't give them Demerol, right? And the administrator said, yeah. I said, well, if they don't need respiratory therapy, you don't give them respiratory therapy. And he said, well, no, that's not true, because if they don't need respiratory therapy, the doctor ordered it, so they must need it. I said, then you want me to stop the program entirely? No, we want you to keep it for the Medicare patients because it makes us money, but it's not making us money for the other patients that are privately paid by health insurance. And that so offended me because I wanted to do good work, I wanted to do ethical work, and I wanted to get patients well the right way. I wanted to follow the American Association of Respiratory Care's clinical practice guidelines and do great care. I refused to do that. I told them that that was not right, it was not ethical, and I could not do that. And a couple of days after that, probably 3 or 4 weeks after that, they fired me. And like all things that appear to be a great trauma in your life, being fired was one of the best things in the world that happened to me because it freed me up. I could now, instead of going to school in Toledo, Ohio, where I was at, I could go back to Missouri and go to St. Louis University, which had a great health law program. And I thought, man, that would be the perfect place to learn all about health law so that if these hospitals won't listen to me as a respiratory therapist, I can make them listen to me as a lawyer. And that was the second shove that pushed me in the direction of becoming an attorney. And so I went to St. Louis University. The first year I paid for everything myself. The second and third years I got scholarships on the basis of my grades. I finished number 7 in a class of 213 in the top 3% of my class. And the person who was the valedictorian was about the only person I knew there who was smarter than me. And I wasn't necessarily sure he was smarter than me, he just worked harder than me. I had 3 children at that time, and I had to do things to support them. So many of my activities were, in terms of study, were reduced by virtue of parental responsibilities. But I still graduated number 7 in my class. I was very proud of that, cum laude graduate. And immediately I went out and started looking for a job. And the first, I guess between the second and third years, they hold interviews, and you can do a summer clerkship with some of the bigger law firms. There was a law firm in St. Louis, I won't mention the name, that had a good reputation, and they were conducting interviews at the school. So I went, and instead of doing what everybody else did, which was, hey, I'm a great guy, look at all the things that I've done, and here's my paper that I wrote all by myself, I walked in, and the gentleman who was interviewing me, I said, I read your Admiralty case. And he said, really? You read my Admiralty case? And I said, yeah. And we talked about the Admiralty case for 20 minutes. And at the end of it, he said, I didn't get to ask you a single question. I said, well, you can ask me anything you want. Send me an email. And I said, no, I think I'm going to invite you back to the office for a formal interview at the office, which was really the purpose of this. It was a screening interview. So 2 things happened at that interview that I think are noteworthy. And I still smile when I think about this. I was so nervous. I had a new suit. I'd bought a new suit just for that day. And I didn't have time to get suspenders put in it, and I really preferred suspenders to belt, but I had a belt. And when I had driven to the place, the belt had slipped down and my shirt had become untucked. So I ran into the bathroom before I went to the law office and tucked in my shirt. And after I tucked in my shirt, I unzipped my pants, reached up, grabbed the tail of my shirt, and tugged it down tight on both sides, just the way I had done in the military. And then I went into the interview. And did you notice what I didn't do? Yeah, I didn't zip my pants. So I went through the whole interview with my pants unzipped. And suffice it to say, I didn't get the job. But the other thing that happened in that interview, which was really fundamental to me because it provided me with an understanding of discrimination that I had not had prior to that event. I went in, and one of the 20-something lawyers, who's probably 28, I was 37 at the time, and he said, let me ask you, he said, you're a little older. It's like, really? He said, you're a little older, and how do you think you're going to feel if we ask you to take direction from somebody who's maybe 25, 26 years old? You think you could do that? And I just said, it's not going to bother me. I can learn from anybody. And of course I didn't get the job, and I don't know whether that was because I walked around with my pants unzipped or because they just thought at 37 years old I wouldn't be willing to work hard. And generally speaking, the first 2 years in a law firm like that are spent in the law library, and you don't get an opportunity to shine very much. So again, to make a long story short, I didn't know what the cause of my not getting the job was, but it occurred to me it could be, at least in some respects, due to discrimination. And it made me much more cognizant of the fact that discrimination does exist. So with that, let's move to a kindness moment. Building on that description, every now and again you will have the opportunity to see people do things that are racist and say things that are racist. A lot of times it's couched under the format of a joke, but it often betrays an animus based on race. And just the way sometimes jokes betray an animus based on religion. If you see that, don't laugh. Say, that's not funny. You're making fun of somebody's skin color. They can't help that. You're making fun of somebody's firmly held religious beliefs. You shouldn't do that. Because if you tolerate it, you endorse it, and you make it okay. Don't make it okay. That's what I have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed the story, and I hope you've enjoyed the kindness moment. If you have the opportunity today, do something nice for somebody and catch me down here at the beach next time. Have a great day, guys. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.